The morning sun rose over New Busan Colony like any other day. Sergeant Tae-ho Kim stood on the guard tower, drinking his coffee and watching the mining crews head out to the crystal fields. The coffee was bitter, but it was hot. That was good, enough for him. New Busan was not a pretty place. It sat on a rocky world called Kepler 442c, far from Earth. The buildings were gray metal boxes. The ground was red dirt and stone. But the colony had something special: quantum crystals. These crystals made space travel possible. Without them, ships could not jump between stars. 8,000 people lived in New Busan. Most were miners, and their families. Some were shop owners, doctors, and teachers. They all worked hard to make a life on this distant world. Tae-ho commanded 23 Marines. They kept the peace and protected the colony. Most days were quiet. The biggest problems were drunk miners or family fights. The Marines trained every day, but they had not seen real combat in 2 years. "Sergeant Kim," called Corporal Jin-woo Lee from the communications room. "You need to see this." Tae-ho finished his coffee and walked inside. The comm room was small and dark. Green lights blinked on the control panels. Jin-woo pointed at a screen showing dots moving through space. "Long-range sensors picked this up 20 minutes ago," Jin-woo said. "Looks like a fleet heading our way." Tae-ho studied the screen. He counted 15 dots, maybe 20. They were moving fast and in formation. "How long until they get here?" 6 hours, maybe 7, Jin-woo replied. "Could be traders," Tae-ho said. But he did not believe it. Traders traveled alone or in small groups. This looked like something else. The comm system crackled to life. "All stations, this is Colonial Command. We have identified the approaching fleet as Vorthak warships. All civilians are ordered to report to evacuation points immediately. This is not a drill." Tae-ho felt his stomach drop. Everyone in human space knew about the Vorthaks. They were 8 feet tall with hard shells like insects. They had claws that could cut through metal. They enslaved entire worlds and took everything of value. "Get me Governor Park on the line," Tae-ho ordered. A few minutes later, Governor Mi-young Park appeared on the video screen. She looked tired and worried. Behind her, Tae-ho could see people running around with papers and boxes. "Sergeant Kim, thank goodness," she said. "We have a problem. The transport ships can only take 6,000 people in the first trip. That leaves 2,000 people behind." "How long for the second trip?" Tae-ho asked. 12 hours after the first ships leave, maybe longer if there are problems. Tae-ho did the math in his head. The Vorthaks would arrive in 6 hours. The first ships would leave with 6,000 people. That left 2,000 people and his Marines alone for at least 6 more hours. "What about the shield generators?" he asked. Mi-young looked even more worried. "Engineer Dong-hyuk Nam says they are failing. We have maybe 6 hours of power left, then the Vorthaks can bomb us from orbit." Tae-ho nodded. "We will hold the line until everyone gets out." "Sergeant, there are only 23 of you. Intelligence says the Vorthaks travel with thousands of warriors." "Then we better get ready," Tae-ho said. He cut the connection and turned to Jin-woo. "Get all squad leaders to the briefing room, now." Within 10 minutes, Tae-ho's Marines filled the small briefing room. They were young men and women from all over human space. Some had families back on Earth. Others had nothing but the core. All of them looked nervous, but ready. "Listen up," Tae-ho began. "Vorthak fleet will be here in 6 hours. First evacuation takes 6,000 civilians. We stay behind with 2,000 more people and wait for the second pickup." Private Hye-jin Cho raised her hand. "How many Vorthaks are we talking about, Sergeant?" "Intelligence says at least 3,000 warriors. Maybe more." The room went quiet. Everyone could do the math. 3,000 aliens against 23 Marines and 2,000 civilians. Lance Corporal Sora Jang spoke up. "What are our orders?" Tae-ho looked at each of his Marines. These were good people. They had joined the Corps to protect others. Today, they would have to prove it. "We hold the defensive perimeter around the evacuation zone. No Vorthak gets through. We keep those civilians alive until the transport ships come back." What about the odds? Asked Private Kyung-Soo Han. The odds do not matter, Tae-ho said. We are Marines. We do not leave people behind. We do not quit. We hold the line. The Marines nodded. Fear was in their eyes, but so was determination. They had trained for this moment their whole careers. Hye-jin, you are on the heavy plasma cannon. Jin-woo, take your squad to the north perimeter. Oorah, I need you to keep communications open with the transport ships and Colonial Command. Everyone else, check your weapons and gear. We move out in 30 minutes. As the Marines left to prepare, Tae-ho stayed behind with Jin-woo and Oorah. Sergeant, Jin-woo said quietly, do you really think we can hold them off? Tae-ho was honest. I do not know, but we are going to try. Those people out there are counting on us. Their children are counting on us. Oorah checked her radio equipment. I will. Try to get word to the fleet, maybe they can send help. Good thinking, but do not count on it. The nearest military base is 3 days away. Outside, they could hear the sounds of panic. People were loading trucks with their belongings. Children were crying. Parents were trying to stay calm and pack. Quickly, Tae-ho walked to the window and looked out at the colony. In a few hours, this place would be a battlefield. Many of his Marines would not live to see tomorrow, but 2,000 innocent people would get home to their families. That was worth dying for. Sergeant, Oorah called out. I am getting reports from the sensor stations. The Vorthak fleet just increased speed. They will be here in 4 hours, not 6. Tae-ho grabbed his rifle and helmet. Change of plans, we move out now. As the Marines rushed to their positions, the first transport ships were landing at the evacuation zone. Long lines of colonists waited to board, carrying children and small bags of belongings. Many were crying. All were scared. Tae-ho took position at the main gate of the colony. Through his binoculars, he could see dust clouds on the horizon. The Vorthak dropships were coming. All stations, this is Sergeant Kim, he said into his radio. Enemy contact in approximately 30 minutes. Remember your training. Watch your sectors. No one gets through. The Marines acknowledged the order one by one. Each voice was steady and professional. Tae-ho checked his rifle one more time and settled in behind the defensive barrier. The next few hours would decide the fate of 2,000 innocent people. The Vorthaks were coming, but the Marines were ready. They would hold the line. The first Vorthak dropship came down like a falling star. It crashed into the mining field 2 miles from New Busan Colony with a sound like thunder. Black smoke rose from where it hit the ground. Sergeant Tae-ho Kim watched through his binoculars from behind the defensive wall. Oorah, report to Colonial Command. First enemy contact confirmed. Yes, Sergeant. Communications Specialist Oorah Jang replied into her radio. Colonial Command, this is New Busan Defense Force. Vorthak dropships are landing. We count at least 12 ships so far. More ships fell from the sky. They hit the ground in a wide circle around the colony. Each ship was the size of a building and carried dozens of alien warriors. Hye-jin, can you see the landing zone from your position? Tae-ho asked. Private Hye-jin Cho sat behind the heavy plasma cannon on the south wall. She turned the big weapon toward the crash sites. I can see 3 ships clearly, Sergeant. The doors are opening. What do you see coming out? Hye-jin looked through the cannon's scope. What she saw made her stomach turn cold. They are big, Sergeant. Real big. They walk on 2 legs like us, but they have hard shells. Their arms end in claws instead of hands. The Vorthaks were everything the intelligence report said and worse. Each warrior stood 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that looked like the shell of a giant insect. Their heads had 4 eyes and sharp teeth. But the worst part was their claws, long curved blades that could cut through metal. How many? Tae-ho asked. I count 40 from the first ship, more coming out of the others. Lance Corporal Dong-hyuk Nam was positioned on the east side with his reconnaissance squad. His voice came over the radio, tense but professional. Sergeant, I have visual on 6 more dropships. They landed behind the old mining station. I can see at least 200 Vorthaks moving this way. Tae-ho felt his heart beat faster. 200 from one landing zone. 12 dropships total. That meant over 3,000 enemy warriors, just like intelligence had warned. All stations. Enemy numbers confirmed at approximately 3,000. We are outnumbered 130 to 1. Private Kyung-Soo Han laughed nervously over the radio. Well, Sergeant, at least the odds are fair. Some of the Marines chuckled despite their fear. Humor helped keep them calm. Dong-hyuk, keep watching those eastern positions. I need to know exactly how many we are facing. Roger that, Sergeant. Behind the Marines, the evacuation continued. The first transport ship was almost full. Families hurried up the loading ramp, carrying crying children in small bags. Many people looked back at their homes knowing they would never see them again. Transport Captain Won-sik Yoon walked over to Taeho's position. He was a thin man with gray hair and worry lines around his eyes. Sergeant Kim, we can take 6,000 people as planned. But I heard your radio reports. Are you sure you can hold them off? Taeho did not look away from his binoculars. We will do our job, Captain. You do yours. Get those people out of here. What about the second group? We are supposed to come back for 2,000 more. We will keep them safe until you return. Captain, Yoon looked out at the smoking crash sites. That is a lot of aliens out there. It is a lot of Marines here too, Taeho replied. The captain nodded and walked back to his ship. A few minutes later, the first transport lifted off with 6,000 colonists. The remaining 2,000 people watched it disappear into the sky. One down, Oorah reported. Captain Yoon says they will return in 12 hours. Copy that. Now we just have to hold for 12 hours. The Vorthax were not in a hurry. They spent the first hour organizing their forces and studying the human defenses. Taeho could see them moving between the crashed ships like ants around a nest. They are smart, Dong-hyuk reported. They are not just charging at us. They are making a plan. What kind of plan? Looks like they are splitting into groups. Some are moving north, some south. I think they want to surround us. Taeho studied the colony's layout. The defensive walls formed a square around the main buildings. The evacuation zone was in the center, where the remaining civilians waited. The Marines had good firing positions, but they could not be everywhere at once. Jinwoo, take 2 Marines and reinforce the north wall. Heejin, can you turn that plasma cannon to cover the south approach? Already on it, Sergeant. As the sun reached its highest point, the Vorthax began to move. They did not run like human soldiers. Instead, they walked forward slowly, their claws clicking on the rocky ground. They made a sound like hundreds of insects chirping. The first group of aliens reached the outer fence 500 yards from the main defenses. They cut through the metal wire like it was paper. Range 500 yards, Hyojin reported. I have a clear shot. Hold your fire, let them get closer. The Vorthax kept walking, 400 yards, 300, 200, now! Taeho shouted. Heejin fired the plasma cannon. The bright blue beam cut through 6 Vorthax like they were made of paper. The aliens behind them scattered for cover. The Marines opened fire with their rifles. The bullets bounced off some of the Vorthax armor, but others found weak spots. Several aliens fell to the ground, green blood pooling around them. The Vorthax roared in anger and charged toward the walls. They were fast despite their size. Their claws tore chunks out of the defensive barriers as they climbed. They're trying to get over the south wall, Jinwoo called out. Heejin, sweep the wall with the cannon. The plasma beam swept across the top of the wall, knocking 3 Vorthax back to the ground. But more kept coming. Private Yoo-jin Kang was positioned near the gate with her rifle. A Vorthax warrior made it over the wall and dropped down 10 feet from her position. The alien was huge up close, its 4 eyes glowing red with rage. Yoo-jin fired 3 quick shots. The first 2 bounced off the alien's chest armor. The third shot hit the creature's shoulder joint where the armor plates met. Green blood sprayed out and the Vorthax stumbled. The joints! Yoo-jin shouted into her radio. Shoot for the joints in their armor! This information spread quickly among the Marines. Soon they were all aiming for the weak spots, shoulders, elbows, knees, and neck joints. The Vorthax began falling faster, but there were so many of them. For every alien that fell, 2 more took its place. Sergeant, Dong-hyuk called out. Large group moving on the east wall, at least 50 of them. Can you hold them? We will try. The battle raged for 2 hours. The Marines fought hard and smart, using their knowledge of the colony layout to their advantage. They fell back to secondary positions when overwhelmed, then struck back when the aliens spread out too thin, but they were losing ground. 3. Marines were wounded, ammunition was running low, and the vortex kept coming. As the sun began to set, painting the sky red like blood, Tae-ho looked at his remaining forces. 20 Marines still able to fight, 2,000 civilians still waiting for evacuation, and at least 2,000 Vorthax still alive outside the walls. Oorah, any word from the transport ships? Captain Yoon reports they are refueling and loading supplies, still on schedule for return in 10 hours. 10 more hours. Tae-ho looked at his tired Marines and wondered if any of them would live to see the sunrise. But they had held the line so far. 6,000 people were safe because of their sacrifice they would continue to hold. The night was dark and cold. Sergeant Tae-ho Kim lay behind a pile of concrete blocks watching the Vorthak camp through his night vision scope. The aliens had pulled back after their first attack, but they were not gone. Hundreds of them moved around their crashed ships like shadows. "Sergeant," whispered Private Eugene Kang from the position next to him. "They are planning something big." Tae-ho could see it too. The Vorthax were gathering in large groups. They carried heavy weapons and metal shields. This would not be like their first disorganized charge. "Oorah, report to all positions. Enemy preparing for major assault at dawn. Communication specialist." Oorah Jang's voice crackled back through the radio. "All stations acknowledge. Estimated time until attack?" Tae-ho checked his watch. It was 3 in the morning. 2 hours, maybe 3. Behind the Marines, the remaining 2,000 colonists huddled in the evacuation zone. Dr. Yoon Ji-moon had set up a medical station in the old cafeteria. She moved between wounded Marines and scared civilians, doing what she could with limited supplies. "How are the injured?" Tae-ho asked when he checked on her. Dr. Moon looked tired. Her hands were stained with blood from treating wounds. "Private Han has a broken arm, but he can still fight. Corporal Lee took shrapnel in his leg. He needs real medical care, but he refuses to be evacuated." "What about ammunition?" "That is a bigger problem. Most of the Marines are down to their last few magazines." Tae-ho nodded grimly. They had fired thousands of rounds during the first battle. The Vorthax had thick armor, and it took many bullets to bring one down. "We need to be smarter about this," he said to himself. Mechanic Kyung-soo Han overheard him. Despite his broken arm, Han was working on something in the corner of the cafeteria. He had torn apart mining equipment and was connecting wires to explosive charges. "What are you building?" Tae-ho asked. "Booby traps, Sergeant. The Vorthax are strong, but they are not very smart. They walk straight toward whatever they want to attack." Han showed Tae-ho his work. He had taken mining explosives and rigged them with motion sensors. When a Vorthak walked past, the bomb would explode. "How many can you make?" "I have enough. Explosives for 20 devices. But I need help placing them. Eugene, take 2 Marines and help Han set up his traps. Put them along the most likely attack routes." Eugene nodded and gathered her team. They spent the next hour crawling through the darkness, placing Han's explosive devices around the colony perimeter. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Dong-hyuk Nam had been studying the Vorthax through his binoculars. He called Tae-ho over to his position on the east wall. "Sergeant, I figured out something important about how they fight." "What did you learn?" "They have no tactics. They just charge straight at their target. They do not flank or use cover like human soldiers would." Tae-ho looked. Through the binoculars, Dong-hyuk was right. The Vorthax gathered in straight lines facing the colony walls. They planned to walk forward and smash through the defenses with brute force. "That gives us an advantage," Tae-ho said. "We can predict where they will attack." "Exactly. And I have an idea." Dong-hyuk showed Tae-ho a map of the colony. He had marked several positions with red circles. "If we let them break through at certain points, we can funnel them into kill zones. The plasma cannon can sweep these areas clean." It was risky. They would have to let the Vorthax get close to the civilians. But with 20 Marines against 2,000 aliens, they needed every advantage. "Set it up," Tae-ho ordered. As dawn approached, the Marines prepared for the second battle. They had repositioned themselves according to Dong Hyuk's plan. Private Hyejin Cho had moved the heavy plasma cannon to a central position where it could cover multiple approaches. Corporal Jinwoo Lee limped to his post despite his wounded leg. "I am not missing this fight," he told Dr. Moon when she tried to stop him. The remaining Marines were spread thin across the defensive line. Each position had only 1 or 2 defenders, but Han's explosive traps were in place, and they had a better understanding of how the Vorthax fought. "Here they come," Sora announced over the radio. The Vorthax attacked just as the sun rose. They came in 3 massive groups, each with hundreds of warriors. Their claws gleamed in the morning light as they marched toward the colony walls. The first group hit Han's explosive traps at 200 yards. The bombs went off in sequence, throwing dirt and alien body parts into the air. Dozens of Vorthax were killed or wounded, but the rest kept coming. "Wait for it," Taeho said into his radio, as the aliens reached the outer defenses. The Vorthax smashed through the fence and barriers exactly where Dong Hyuk had predicted. They poured through the gaps like water through a broken dam, heading straight for the evacuation zone. "Now, all positions, open fire." The Marines opened up with everything they had. But this time, they were not trying to stop the charge. They were herding the aliens into the kill zones. Hyejin waited until the Vorthax were packed together in the narrow space between 2 buildings. Then she fired the plasma cannon. The bright blue beam cut through 20 aliens at once. "Target. The leaders!" Taeho shouted. "The big ones in front." Hyejin had noticed that the Vorthax followed the largest warriors. If those leaders fell, the others became confused and disorganized. The Marines focused their fire on the leader-cast Vorthax. These aliens were even bigger than the regular warriors, with darker armor and longer claws. But they had the same weak points at their joints. One by one, the Vorthax leaders fell. Without their guidance, the regular warriors began running in circles, bumping into each other and attacking in random directions. "It is working," Dong Hyuk called out. "They do not know what to do without their leaders." But the victory was short-lived. A second wave of Vorthax attacked from the north, led by an enormous alien that stood 9 feet tall. This one was different from the others. It carried metal weapons instead of just claws, and it seemed to understand human tactics. "That big one is their war chief," Taeho realized. "Take him down." Every Marine who could see the target opened fire on the giant Vorthax. Bullets bounced off its heavy armor like raindrops. The war chief roared and pointed at the plasma cannon. "They are going after Hyejin," Jinwoo warned. A group of 50 Vorthax changed direction and charged toward the plasma cannon position. Hyejin swung the weapon around and fired, but there were too many of them. "I need help over here," she called out. Private Seung-ho Bae was positioned in the maintenance building 50 yards away. He could see a way to reach Hyejin's position through the underground tunnels that connected the colony's buildings. "Sergeant, I can get to the plasma cannon through the tunnels. Give me 2 Marines and we can hit those Vorthax from behind." "Do it." Bae took 2 Marines and disappeared into the maintenance tunnels. A few minutes later, they emerged behind the Vorthax assault group. Their surprise attack from the rear threw the aliens into confusion. Hyejin used the distraction to sweep her cannon across the disorganized Vorthax. Green blood splattered across the ground as dozens of aliens fell. The battle raged for 3 hours. The Marines used every trick they could think of. They collapsed buildings to block Vorthax advances. They used mining vehicles as mobile weapons platforms. They even turned the colony's sprinkler system against the aliens, flooding certain areas, to slow them down. Slowly, the tide turned. The Vorthax were brave and strong, but they could not adapt to the Marines' changing tactics. Every time they figured out one human strategy, the Marines switched to something else. By noon, the Vorthax assault had been broken. Hundreds of alien bodies lay scattered around the colony. The surviving warriors retreated to their ships, dragging their wounded with them. "Status report," Taeho called out. "North wall secure," Jinwoo reported. "East wall secure," Dong Hyuk confirmed. "Plasma cannon operational," Hyejin added. Taeho counted his forces. 19 Marines were still able to fight. They had held against impossible odds for the second time, but as he looked out at the Vorthax camp, he could see the aliens regrouping. The war chief was still alive, and it was clearly planning another attack. Oorah, any word from the transport ships? Captain Yoon reports they are 2 hours out, but Sergeant... She paused. Long-range sensors show more Vorthak ships approaching. Reinforcements. Taeho felt his heart sink. They had fought off 3,000 aliens with 23 Marines. Now more were coming, and he only had 19 Marines left. But 2,000 civilians were counting on them. The transport ships were only 2 hours away. They would hold the line. The ground shook as the new Vorthak ships crashed down around New Busan colony. Sergeant Taeho Kim watched through his cracked binoculars as fresh alien warriors poured out of the smoking dropships. These Vorthaks looked different from the first wave. They carried bigger weapons and moved with more purpose. How many new ones? Asked Lance Corporal Dong Hyuk Nam from his position on the east wall. Taeho counted the ships. 8 more dropships, that means at least 600 fresh warriors. Private Hee-jin Cho looked up from cleaning her plasma cannon. 600 plus whatever is left from the first group. We are looking at maybe 800 total now. The math was simple and terrible. 19 Marines against 800 aliens. The odds had gone from bad to impossible. Sergeant, Communications Specialist Oorah Jang called out. The transport ships are 1 hour out. Captain Yoon wants to know if the landing zone is secure. Taeho looked at the evacuation area behind their lines. 2,000 civilians sat in groups, holding their children and small bags of belongings. They looked at the Marines with hope and fear. Tell Captain Yoon the landing zone will be secure when he gets here, Taeho replied. But he was not sure how they could keep that promise. The new Vorthak force was different from the first wave. Instead of charging straight at the colony walls, they spread out in a wide circle. They dug positions in the rocky ground and set up heavy weapons. They learned from their mistakes, observed Corporal Jin Woo Lee. His wounded leg was getting worse, but he refused to leave his post. Someone is teaching them how to fight properly. Through his binoculars, Taeho could see a massive Vorthak directing the other aliens. This one was even bigger than the war chief they had faced earlier. Its armor was decorated with metal spikes and strange symbols. That must be their supreme commander, Taeho said, the one giving them new tactics. Private Yoojin Kang was watching, from another position. Sergeant, they are setting up some kind of big gun. Looks like artillery. The Vorthaks had dragged a huge weapon from one of their ships. It was the size of a truck and pointed directly at the colony's central power plant. If they destroy the power plant, we lose the shields in all our defensive systems, Mechanic Kyung-Soo Han warned over the radio. His broken arm was in a sling, but he was still working to keep their equipment running. How long until the shields fail anyway? Taeho asked. Maybe 2 hours of power left. 3 if we shut down everything except the defensive grid. Taeho made a hard decision. Shut down all non-essential systems, lights, heating, everything. We need those shields up when the transport ships arrive. The colony went dark except for the red glow of emergency lighting. The remaining civilians huddled together in the cold, but they understood. Their lives depended on those shields. The Vorthak Supreme Commander raised one of its massive claws. All around the colony, hundreds of alien warriors prepared to attack. Here we go again, Jin Woo muttered. But this assault was different. Instead of charging across open ground, the Vorthaks moved carefully from cover to cover. They used their artillery to destroy sections of the colony's outer walls before advancing. They are not making the same mistakes, Dong Hyuk reported. These ones know how to fight. The Marines had to fall back from their outer positions as Vorthak fire became too heavy. They retreated to secondary defensive lines closer to the evacuation zone. We are running out of space, Hyejin said as she moved her plasma cannon to a new position. Private Shung-ho Bae was defending the north approach with only 2 other Marines. A group of 50 Vorthaks was advancing on his position, using metal shields to protect themselves from rifle fire. I cannot hold them, Bae reported. They are going to break through. Taeho looked at the tactical situation. If the north line collapsed, the Vorthaks would be able to attack the evacuation zone directly. 2,000 civilians would die. Bae, fall back to the inner perimeter. We will make our stand at the power plant. Roger that, Sergeant. The Marines pulled back to their final defensive positions around the colony's central power plant. It was a large building with thick concrete walls perfect for a last stand. But it also controlled all the colony's systems. If the Vorthax took it, they could shut down the shields and call in orbital bombardment. New plan, Tejo announced, over the radio. We hold this building until the transport ships arrive. No alien gets inside. Dr. Yoonji Moon had moved her medical station into the power plant's basement. She was treating wounded Marines while also coordinating with the civilian leaders. How much longer? She asked Tejo. 40 minutes until the ships arrive. Maybe an hour to load everyone. Can we hold for an hour? Tejo looked at his remaining Marines. Several were wounded. All were exhausted. Their ammunition was almost gone. We will hold, he said simply. The Vorthax surrounded the power plant building. Their supreme commander stood just outside rifle range, directing the attack with hand signals. The aliens began probing for weak spots in the building's defenses. They are testing us, Yujin observed, looking for the best way to get inside. Han was working frantically at the power plant's control systems. Sergeant, I have an idea. If I overload the main reactor, I can create a massive explosion. It would take out most of the Vorthax. What about us? We would not survive either. But the civilians would be safe when the transport ships arrive. Tejo considered the option. It would save the 2,000 colonists, but it would kill all 19 Marines. Before he could answer, Private Ji-hoon Seo volunteered for a different mission. Sergeant, I can see their heavy artillery from here. If someone could get close enough to destroy it, the transport ships could land safely. Seo pointed out a window at the massive Vorthax gun. It was positioned 200 yards away, surrounded by alien guards. That is a suicide mission, Jin Woo said. Maybe. But if I take enough explosives, I can take that gun out. The transport ships would have a clear approach. Tejo looked at the young Marine. Seo had just turned 20 last month. He had a girlfriend back on Earth who was waiting for him to come home. Seo, you do not have to do this. Yes, I do, Sergeant. Those people down there are counting on us. This is what Marines do. Tejo handed Seo a bag of Han's remaining explosives. Make it count, Marine. Seo slipped out through a maintenance tunnel, while the other Marines provided covering fire. He crawled through the rocky terrain, moving from boulder to boulder to avoid detection. The Vorthax began their final assault on the power plant. They came from all directions at once, their claws scraping against the concrete walls as they tried to climb inside. They are coming through the windows, Heejin shouted. The Marines fought desperately to keep the aliens out. Yujin and Dong Hyuk held the main entrance while Jin Woo covered the side doors despite his wounded leg. Outside, Seo reached the Vorthax artillery position. He could see the alien guards up close, massive creatures with weapons bigger than his entire body. But he also saw the weak spot in their gun where the ammunition was stored. Seo set the explosive charges and started the timer, 30 seconds until detonation. A Vorthax guard spotted him and roared an alarm. Other aliens turned toward the human intruder. Seo keyed his radio one last time. Sergeant Kim, this is Seo. Tell my girlfriend I love her. Mission accomplished. The explosion lit up the sky like a small sun. The Vorthax artillery gun disappeared in a ball of fire, taking dozens of alien warriors with it. Inside the power plant, the Marines heard the blast and saw the flash through the windows. Seo did it, Oorah reported with tears in her eyes. The landing zone is clear. Transport ships on final approach, came Captain Yoon's voice over the radio. Landing in 5 minutes. But the Vorthax were not finished. Enraged by the loss of their weapon, they threw everything they had at the power plant. The Supreme Commander itself joined the assault, its massive claws tearing chunks out of the building's walls. They are breaking through, Han warned. Tejo looked at his 18 remaining Marines. They had held longer than anyone thought possible. Seo's sacrifice had cleared the way for the evacuation ships. But the Vorthax were inside the building now, and the final battle was about to begin. All Marines fall back to the reactor room, Tejo ordered. We make our last stand there. The transport ships were landing outside, but the Vorthax stood between the Marines and salvation. They would hold the line until the end. The reactor room was the heart of the power plant. Massive machines hummed with electrical energy, casting strange shadows on the metal walls. Sergeant Tae-ho Kim and his 18 Marines took cover behind the heavy equipment as Vorthak claws scraped against the sealed door. "How long can that door hold?" asked Corporal Jin-Woo Lee, gripping his rifle with bloody hands. Mechanic Kyung-Soo Han looked at the reinforced steel barrier. Deep scratches were already appearing where the aliens attacked it. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Outside the building, they could hear the sound of transport ships landing. Captain Won-sik Yoon's voice crackled over the radio. "New Busan Defense Force, this is Transport 1. We are loading civilians now. How much time do you need?" Communication. Specialist Sora Jang answered while checking her weapon. "Transport 1, we need 15 minutes to get all civilians on board." "Understood. We will be ready for takeoff in 15 minutes. Tae-ho looked around the reactor room. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours. The door was already bending, under the weight of Vorthak attacks. "Han, is the reactor overload still an option?" Han nodded toward the control panel. "I can set it to explode in 20 minutes. That would give the civilians time to escape, but..." He did not need to finish the sentence. Private Hye-jin Cho was setting up her plasma cannon behind a generator. "There might be another way, Sergeant. I found something in the maintenance tunnels." She pointed to a narrow shaft that led under the main floor. "That tunnel goes directly under the landing pad. If someone could get through there, they might be able to attack the Vorthaks from behind while they are focused on us." "How many people could fit through that tunnel?" "1 person, maybe 2 if they crawl." Lance Corporal Dong Hyuk Nam studied the tunnel entrance. "I can make it through there. If I take enough explosives, I could hit their command group." "That is suicide," Private Eugene Kang said. "There are hundreds of them out there." "Maybe not," Dong Hyuk replied. "I have been watching their supreme commander. It stays back from the fighting and gives orders. If I could take it out, the others might scatter like they did when we killed their war leaders." The door to the reactor room buckled inward. Metal bolts popped out of their holes as massive claws pierced through the steel. "Decide now, Sergeant," Han urged. "Reactor overload or the tunnel mission?" Tae-ho made his choice. "Dong Hyuk, take the tunnel. Everyone else, we hold this room until he completes his mission." Dong Hyuk grabbed a bag of explosives and squeezed into the narrow maintenance shaft. "See you on the other side, Marines." The door exploded inward as the first Vorthaks broke through. The Supreme Commander stood behind them, its massive form filling the doorway. Up close, it was even more terrifying than Tae-ho had imagined. 9 feet tall with armor plates like black metal and claws as long as swords. "Open fire!" Tae-ho shouted. The Marines unleashed everything they had. Hye-jin's plasma cannon cut through the first wave of aliens, while the riflemen aimed for joint weaknesses in their armor. But the Vorthaks kept coming. Private Sung-ho Bae was positioned near the door when a Vorthak warrior broke through the defensive line. The alien's claws slashed across his chest, sending him crashing into a control panel. Bae fired his rifle, point blank into the creature's neck joint, killing it even as he fell. "Bae is down," Yujin called out, rushing to help her fallen comrade. More Vorthaks poured through the door. The Marines were forced back deeper into the reactor room, using the massive machines as cover. But they were running out of space and ammunition. "Where is Dong Hyuk?" Jin-Woo asked, firing his last magazine at a group of advancing aliens. Outside, Dong Hyuk crawled through the dark tunnel toward the landing pad. He could hear the battle raging above him and the sound of civilians boarding the transport ships. Every few feet he had to stop and rest. The tunnel was barely wide enough for his shoulders. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, he reached an opening near the landing pad. Through a metal grate he could see the Vorthak Supreme Commander directing its forces. The massive alien stood just 20 feet away, surrounded by a dozen guards. Dong Hyuk set the explosive charges and started the timer, but as he tried to crawl back into the tunnel, his foot knocked against a loose pipe. The clang echoed across the landing pad. The Vorthak Supreme Commander turned toward the sound. Its 4 red eyes focused on the maintenance grate where Dong Hyuk was hiding. "So much for surprise," Dong Hyuk muttered. He kicked open the grate and rolled out onto the landing pad, firing his rifle at the alien guards. The Supreme Commander roared in fury and charged toward the human soldier. Its massive claws swept through the air where Dong Hyuk's head had been, a second before. 10 seconds, Dong Hyuk counted down as he dodged another attack. The Vorthak guards surrounded him, but Dong Hyuk kept moving, using his smaller size to stay ahead of their claws. 5 seconds. The Supreme Commander lunged forward, its claws catching Dong Hyuk in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. 3, 2, 1. The explosion threw everyone to the ground. When the smoke cleared, the Vorthak Supreme Commander was dead, along with most of its guards. Dong Hyuk lay motionless nearby, but he was breathing. Back in the reactor room, the effect was immediate. The attacking Vorthaks suddenly stopped their assault and looked around in confusion. Without their Supreme Commander's orders, they did not know what to do. The command structure is broken, Taeho realized. They are leaderless. The Vorthaks began retreating from the reactor room, making strange chittering sounds that might have been communication attempts. Without clear orders, they fell back to their ships. All stations report status, Taeho called out. North perimeter clear, reported Private Kang. South perimeter clear, added Han. Transport ships are loaded and ready for takeoff, Oorah announced. Captain Yoon requests permission to depart. Taeho looked around the reactor room. 5 Marines lay wounded but alive. The rest were exhausted and low on ammunition, but they had done it. They had held the line. Permission granted. Tell them to get those people home safe. Through the broken windows, they watched the transport ships lift off into the sky. 2,000 civilians were safe, heading back to human space and their families. Sergeant, Yu-jin said, pointing outside. Look. The surviving Vorthaks were boarding their own ships. Without their leadership structure, they had lost the will to fight. One by one, the alien dropships lifted off and disappeared into space. 3 hours later, Captain Won-sik Yoon returned with medical ships and a full Marine company as reinforcement. But the battle was over. Taeho stood in the ruins of New Busan Colony, looking at his surviving Marines. Of the original 23, only 14 were still alive. They had paid a heavy price, but they had saved 8,000 innocent lives. When Idir, the reinforcement commander, asked how such a small unit had held off an entire Vorthak invasion force, Taeho's answer was simple. We are Marines, sir. We held the line because that is what Marines do. Oorah! The word spread throughout human space. The Battle of New Busan became legend. The Vorthak Empire, shocked by the fierce resistance of human defenders, began avoiding human colonies. A memorial was built on the ruins of New Busan. It listed the names of the 9 Marines who gave their lives, Seo, Bae, and 7 others who died defending innocent people. The inscription read simply, "They held the line." And in Marine training centers across human space, recruits learned about the day when 23 ordinary humans faced impossible odds and won through courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood. The line had held. It would always hold as long as there were Marines to defend it.